Welcome back. All right, so reading an article today from Dom in The Athletic and combining that with reading from Elliot Friedman on all of the things with Vancouver, I want to do this. I want to do this a little bit different. So I've talked recently about the Canucks' slow start and where we're at. I have been vocal about the fact that, yes, if the Canucks decided to move on from their general manager or coach, I would support that. But I've also been clear that I don't see the Canucks ever winning a Stanley Cup in my lifetime. And there's no, you could hook me up to a lie detector. I know I'll pass it. I absolutely 100% unequivocally believe that Vancouver will never win another Stanley Cup. However, and they've never won their first, so there can't be another. However, I do believe Boston will. And I think Dallas has a good shot too if they can put things together. I've seen them both do it, and I can see some promise in both organizations. So Vancouver, the problem to me has been this is a team that's trying to tread water rather than get ahead. This is a team that right from the starting gate, right from when it begins, when Jim Benning was hired on May 21st, 2014, this team has been trying to tread water. We got to get back in. So what's interesting too is I was reading an article from when Lyndon was part of the hiring process from Benning, and said he and Benning had the same vision for how to build a hockey team. They had the same hockey vision. That didn't last, right? And I think it didn't last because the pressure was there to, okay, let's win now. Let's win now. We'll go ahead and we'll give up draft picks. And I could go into all the trades. I've done that. So October 17th of 2017, I talked about Benning's draft picks and trades, which if I did it again now, the board would be much larger, although I didn't use a board for that video, which makes it weird to me. But anyways, looking at his track record there, you know what? He is not as bad at trades as I think some of his reputation would show. However, he does make short-sighted trades. The trades the Canucks have been making since he got here have been trades that a team that's in a playoff spot will make. And there is a portion of Canuck fandom that likes that. That likes the idea of a general manager making a trade that he says, all right, this should get us into the playoffs. And fans look and they go, well, that's a good player. You add him to our team. We didn't give anything up off the current roster. All we gave up was a draft pick and a prospect. So we're fine. And then, maybe they go on a little bit of a run. Maybe that player plays okay. And so it takes away from the fact that they're mortgaging the future for the present, and they're still doing it. This is a team that is still doing it. And it's something that we've seen again this year. And I know in the offseason there was the Oliver Ekman-Larsson deal, which right away I said, why are they taking on the worst contract in the NHL? And there were those that said, hey, OEL can get his game back in Vancouver. He'll be fine. And it's just in Arizona, it's terrible. And the thing was, OEL didn't play well in Arizona last year. I honestly think his game has actually been a little bit better in Vancouver, but then you got to look at the numbers. So December 17th, 2019, I did a video on whose fault is it? Jim Benning versus Travis Green. Now what's interesting is shortly after I did that video, the Canucks go on a run. The Canucks made the playoffs in 2019-2020, which, I'll agree with Dom on this, might have been the worst thing to happen to the team. There are times where a team makes the playoffs and it gives them the impression that they're closer than they are to being a darn good team. I think of Ottawa back in 2017 where they got so close to making it to the final, and so it gave this impression that, hey, Ottawa's close to a Stanley Cup. And so they made some moves over the next 6 months that we look back on now and say, wow, that was questionable. Right, and it's taken a long time, and Ottawa still hasn't dug themselves out of it. And I'm worried that the Canucks are headed to this fate, but they're being dragged kicking and screaming because the word rebuild doesn't get used. At no point in this entire process have we heard, okay, so it's a rebuild. It's never happened. This is a team that's made the playoffs twice since Benning got here in May of 2014. Not May of this year, May of 2014. So they've made the playoffs twice. And yet, the owner's going to sit down with them and have a chat, and there's nothing imminent yet when it comes to a change in terms of leadership. Now, at the time that I did the video on December 17th of 2019, here's the interesting part. The Canucks had allowed the first goal in 22 of 34 games. I wish the number was that kind of ratio now. They have allowed the first goal in so many games. But it's okay, because when they score first, they're losing anyways. So this team is finding new ways to fall short. And the team that I was talking about in December 17th of 2019 was above 500. Barely, but they were above 500. They were 17, 14, and 4, I believe, at that point. So at that point, we're talking about a team that's underachieved. And now here we are less than 2 years later, and it is significantly worse. Most recent betting video that I did was February 11th of 2021, where I specifically talked about him. And honestly, there's so much discussion about him. I think at this point, we can push that aside for now. I want to look at the state of the organization. I want to look at the state of this team and harken back to the days of this beautiful jersey being their main jersey. And I mean, seriously, who would not want this to scare the opposition? That was the idea, was to strike fear into the opponents. They wore this flying V. The idea was that the sight of all these players wearing these flying V jerseys would draw the fear out of the... What it did was it drew regales of laughter. It's more of a, well, if you want to throw them off because they're giggling too hard to make a save, then by all means wear that jersey. So let's take a look at the new guys. And again, we can all talk about betting this and betting that, but I want to talk about the new guys, and then I'll come to Ekman Larson as well after, okay? So Garland, 16 games, 3 goals, 9 assists, 12 points. I will absolutely say nothing negative about Garland. The effort is there. Everything about Garland's game is good. However, 3 goals in 16 games tells you he's on pace for about 15 goals. I am not saying anything about him being a negative at all. But if your most prominent, consistent player offensively is on a 15-goal pace, it's damning praise, right? So Besser has been good at times. Bo Horvat's been very good and solid, but is Bo Horvat your leading scorer if you're a playoff team? Probably not, right? Pettersson has been invisible in a lot of ways. And I have to say, it kind of reminds me of Bure. What we're watching Pettersson go through right now reminds me a lot of Bure when he had his rough years in Vancouver. And so I don't have any information on this, but with Bure, we found out later there was stuff going on behind the scenes that was influencing his behavior, his performance on the ice, right? So I worry with Pettersson. Chase on 11 games, 2 goals, 1 assist, 3 points. All of those points are power play points. He gives you nothing 5-on-5. He's on the 4th line, and I agree with fans in not understanding necessarily why he ends up being the guy that makes it here instead of a couple of the other guys that get waived and moved, right? And I say that because while I like Chason's compete, and I think he's a great guy, I don't understand what the thinking was here in waiving a Gadjevich, in waiving a McEwen for a guy who hasn't given you any 5-on-5 points. That's the same thing you're going to get with McEwen, but you're going to get the odd fight here and there. You're going to get the physicality. You're going to get a decent bottom 6 forward who has at least some pushback, right? Philadelphia fans have seen that. He's been a healthy scratch for Philadelphia too at times, but still, right? Podkolzin, 3 goals in 14 games. Very high compete level for this kid. The numbers aren't there. I didn't think they would be early on. I think he'll start producing. But this is where the Travis Green questions come in, right? Would he have more points under a different coach? If he was on a different line? If the line mates were different on this team, would we see more points from other players? Shen, 5 games played, 2 assists, right underneath Justin Dowling, who has 2 goals in 9 games. I like Dowling, but should he be a healthy scratch more often than he is? Luke Shen, decent depth defenseman, but this is the thing. In the offseason, they went out and got a bunch of depth defensemen. Dickinson, 1 goal in 14 games. He is not playing as well this year as he did last year in Dallas. It's just not there. The absolutely insanely good season he had in Dallas last year, which made him worth picking up for Vancouver, it just hasn't been there this year. Hunt, 1 assist in 4 games. Pullman, 1 assist in 13 games. I think Pullman has been paired with Hughes, and I think that's had a mixed reaction. But the interesting thing, too, is that Quinn Hughes, his numbers aren't bad this year at all. He's played quite well. Defensively, is he going to be a misadventure? At times, absolutely. That's he's a one-way defenseman, so you're going to expect that. Kyle Burrows, I've liked his game. 12 games, though, no points. And his plus minus is kind of ugly. So while I like some of the physicality and all of that, Burrows is probably best suited being further down the depth chart. And Lamico, no points in 16 games. They picked him up in exchange for Hugh Levy, right? And so far, it's been up in the air. Now, on the upside, Noah Juleson has had a decent run with Abbotsford, and maybe Noah Juleson ends up getting called up. But again, we're talking about depth defensemen here. We're not talking about top four defensemen. And the Canucks desperately need a top four defenseman, maybe need two, right? And Halak, 0-3-1 with a .903 save percentage. Halak's played okay. The Canucks have not played well in front of him. He's not had the goal support. So the numbers have not been great. Now, the guys they traded, not a good year for Eriksson, 1 assist in 14 games. Roussel's got 1 goal in 12 games. And Beagle's got no points in 16 games. So absolutely, if these 3 guys were still Canucks, and if they didn't have Garland, they wouldn't be any further ahead. And that would be the argument, right, from fans would be, well, we traded out those contracts. Yes, but those contracts all expire next summer. All of that cap space then belongs to Arizona. And they got a first-round draft pick, and they used that for Dylan Guenther. Guenther could be a very good player in the NHL. And so, again, it's trying to tread water, trying to get to being maybe a middling playoff team, maybe compete for a wild card spot, and you're giving away your future. And then what threw me off with this trade, and I'm still saying this now, is they don't have cap space next year. Next summer, they're still going to have the same cap problems. Now, what's interesting to me is that Edler goes to LA. Edler's had a decent start with LA. 4 assists in 15 games. Please get him a goal. He needs that 100th goal. He's been waiting over a year for it. He signed for $3.5 million for 1 year. I think if the Canucks had brought him back for $3.5 million for 1 year, I think Canuck fans would have been fine with that. I really do. I think Edler, while, yes, his game isn't what it was, say, 5 or 6 years ago, neither's Ekman Larsson's. Ekman Larsson's 5 years younger than Edler, absolutely. But Ekman Larsson's numbers, 1 goal, 2 assists for 3 points in 16 games. He's on pace for about 15 points. He makes more than this, but with salary retained, his contract is worth $7.26 million in cap hit for the Vancouver Canucks all the way until 2027, and he has a no-movement clause. So that's really, to me, that kind of encapsulates the issue. You could look at the team from last year and say, all right, we missed the playoffs. We'll use the number 9 pick. We'll use it on Guenther. We'll re-sign Edler. We'll sign him for $3.5 million. That saves you $3.7 million below Ekman Larsson. You don't have to worry about it for 7 years. It's just the one, right? Or 6 years. It's fine. 2027. It's a while. It's a while before Ekman Larsson's contract expires. And at age 30, it is possible that OEL rediscovers that and becomes that number 1 defenseman. But I was so concerned when they traded for Ekman Larsson and Benny came out and said, this is a number 1 defenseman. Because I said out loud, he's not. And I didn't say that to insult Ekman Larsson or anything else. It's just when I look at teams around the league and you look at playoff teams, you look at those number 1 defensemen, whether you're looking at Makar down there with Colorado, and it's arguable about whether he's the number 1 right now or not. There's 4 really good defensemen there. Maybe more than that, right? And most teams will have that one really good defenseman, that one minute-munching defenseman who is excellent, usually at both ends of the rink, and leadership and all of that. And I just didn't see that with OEL. And I hadn't seen that in Arizona for at least, I'll say, 2 years. And yes, Arizona was underachieving, but I find it odd when people talk about a team underachieving, but they don't want to say anything about the players leading to that and not doing everything that they're supposed to do. So again, Ekman Larsson, that's a deal that I think hamstrings, or it hurts the Canucks for a while, right? Next summer they do not have, and this is the funny thing too, because the argument's always been, well, there's no concern. The Canucks can just keep everybody. They can afford to re-sign everybody, right? Stanley Cup championship teams add players. They add players. They plan ahead with the cap. Part of the reason Colorado is so damn good is that Sakic planned it all out so that, all right, this team isn't very good. I'm going to trade Duchesne. I want exactly what I want for him. And he waited and he got it. And then he keeps his cap space. He didn't go out and spend to the cap. Even when people in the media are like, I don't understand why Colorado's not spending to the cap. Because he doesn't have to. The idea that we have to spend to the cap is so odd to me. And the idea of, well, if we have, say, $10 million in cap space and these guys cost $5 million each, we can just keep it all together. If your team isn't good enough to make the playoffs and you do not have the cap space to add the players you need to become good enough to make the playoffs, the best you can do is tread water. The best you can do is tread water. The Canucks just have not had the space. And it's been this way for years. I was talking 2 years ago about the team not having cap space. I was talking 4 years ago about the team not having cap space. Look at the teams right now that are rebuilding. Ottawa has a ton of it. New Jersey has a lot of it. LA, they're up near the cap now, but they had cap space last season. Teams that are rebuilding and doing it right have cap space. And when you have that cap space, you can use it to then acquire more draft picks. But that's the other thing about the Canucks. They've shown no interest in acquiring extra draft picks. And for a team that's run by a GM that's known as a pretty good scout, it's just odd. It's really weird to me that this team continually throws away draft picks and prospects. Like Tyler Madden, saw him for Ontario here in Abbotsford a couple weeks ago. And, I mean, he is small by NHL standards. I don't know if he's going to make it. But I liked his compete in that game, and I thought, a little bit of grit there, and pretty feisty for a little guy. He would have been popular in Vancouver. But Vancouver, again, it was, well, we want Toffoli, so they go out, they get Toffoli, and then they didn't keep Toffoli, so then you're giving up that prospect and that draft pick, and you're not managing to keep the player, who then goes and signs in Montreal. And all of the communication around that time and Toffoli saying, I guess I know what they're going through. They didn't even call. Troy Stecher, they didn't even call him. That's the kind of thing that I think makes it difficult to attract free agents. I think it makes it difficult to, I think reputation plays a large role in the National Hockey League. If you're going to be a free agent or if you're a veteran, you're like, all right, I want to know where I can go. 3 locations. So Pittsburgh, Vancouver, and Florida. Florida hasn't won around in 1996, but if Florida comes calling, teams are going to listen. Pittsburgh, you got Crosby, you got Malkin, you've got a winning tradition. Sure, Vancouver, I don't know. And so that's where it gets difficult for me, because I think that every year that we do this treading water thing and the team doesn't get better, I think it makes it worse. Let me back up the board just a little bit. There we go. There you go. See, there you go. I'll get over to this. So at the time that Benning's hired, the team's record was 36, 35, and 11 in the 2013-2014 season. Not good enough. But the idea was we're going to get back to the playoffs. Now here we are, many, many years later, and the team's record is currently 5-9-2. Again, they made the playoffs in 2015. That was the bounce back from Tortorella being fired. And then they made the playoffs in 2020, which was this great run. Markstrom was a big part of it. And then, of course, Demko in that series against Vegas. But the thing is, the exits from that 2020 playoff roster, some of them really hurt. They hurt at the time, and it still bothers me now. So Chris Tanev, the argument always was, well, Tanev can't stay healthy for a full season. Right. But I'd rather have 60 games from Tanev over an 80-game season than none. And I'd rather have Tanev than have him replaced by, well, nobody. They've been trying to replace Tanev since he left. And Calgary, I think Calgary's pretty happy with Chris Tanev. He's a pretty good defensive defenseman, and every now and then he throws in a goal here and there, and he makes a good offensive play with the puck as well. When the Canucks were on that run in the playoffs, I remember being very clear, I really desperately wanted Tanev to stay in Vancouver. I really desperately wanted Vancouver to find a way to bring back Tanev. I also wanted Markstrom back, but I understood that with the Seattle expansion coming up, you couldn't keep both goaltenders. You couldn't have Markstrom and Demko. Now, losing Edler, of course, that was last offseason because they weren't going to pay him. They moved on from him. Toffoli, of course, goes to Montreal. He had a great run last year. This year's been a little more rough. I would think that if the Canucks had cap space, they might be able to inquire with Montreal about Toffoli. They have zero cap space to do so. Stetcher goes to Detroit. Stetcher's been good in Detroit. Stetcher was one that I thought, well, he's replaceable at the time. I'm going to go back on that and say they should have found a way to keep Stetcher. If they weren't going to keep Tanev, they should have found a way to keep Stetcher. Because it's the continuity, I think, is important while you're still trying to improve at the same time. And it's a tricky balance, right, in the NHL. Look at Tampa. Tampa made the appropriate changes while still keeping the right guys in the locker room from those previous failures. And then it all came together and they win back-to-back Stanley Cups. Jordy Ben, I like Jordy Ben as a depth guy, but clearly, at this point, his NHL career is winding down. Gaudette, I don't think Gaudette's come back to bite them. His time in Chicago's been kind of up and down, right? He's been a healthy scratch for Chicago on occasion. Zach McEwen, losing him to Philly, it hurts on some level because you need to have that physicality on the team. There's none. My biggest problem with the Canucks is how easy it is to knock them off the puck, how easy it is to play against them. And it shows in the fact they don't score first. It shows in the fact that, yeah, teams can just kind of bully them around. Who's going to answer? Shen? Like, which player on the current Canucks roster do you say, all right, Pettersson just had somebody run him. All right, which guy on the bench has that physicality? Now, I've said for years, the idea of having a goon on the bench to go out there and patrol things, I'm not a huge fan of that. But you do need to have some kind of a physical pushback. So teams can't just come in and push you around. And it feels like the Canucks get pushed around. And that there just isn't any pushback there. And so it ends up making it look like the players don't necessarily care. Travis Green gets mad and he yells and screams and all that, but it does give the impression that Green can't get them over that hump. And then you see the apathy. What's going on right now in the Vancouver Canucks fandom is apathy. And what's weird is I really enjoy going to Abbotsford Canucks games. I'm going to one again on Friday. I'm excited to go watch the Abbotsford Canucks. Am I excited to watch the Vancouver Canucks? I'm seeing 2 of their games next month. Not really. But I was strategic with which games I bought tickets to this year. I got tickets for Dallas. I got tickets for the LA Kings game because it's on a night where there's very little going on in the NHL. It's one of the few that's the case. And then we're going to the Boston game. So if I'm going to go and see Vancouver play, I'd rather see them against Boston or Dallas. And keep in mind, last season that we had tickets, which was 2019-2020, of course, I went to a bunch of games. I was convinced that the Canucks could make it better. I think I went to 5 or 6 different games. I was excited to go to Vancouver games. Right now, no. I don't have any interest. None. If I got a phone call today saying, hey, we've got tickets, center ice, on the glass, do you want to go tonight? I'd say, I'm good, thanks. Nah. Not really. Nah, we have to drive into Vancouver and nah. Thanks though. And that's a completely different feeling that I have from 2 years ago, where I was very excited about the direction of the team and I thought, yeah, no, things are going to get better, and they haven't. And the new players, I mean, yes, Garland has been a hit. Absolutely, Garland's been a hit. But between Garland and OEL, that's about $12 million in cap. The two of them put together is about $12 million in cap space. And again, I like Garland a lot. I really do. But the Canucks, they need to have some space here, and they just seem to be allergic to it. Because again, they're trying to build for playoffs, not to win. And that's a problem. That's a major problem for them. So Markstrom being gone is one that kind of hurts too. Calgary, you're welcome. You're welcome for both Tanev and Markstrom. I don't think it's a coincidence that Calgary's in the position they are in the division, Vancouver's in the position they are in the division, and Markstrom and Tanev have gone to Calgary in that time. But this is also where you get into the Vancouver market side of things. So the attendance in 93-94, the year they go to the Stanley Cup final, 15,140. That's in the old Pacific Coliseum. Then they go over to GM Place, which is, changed its name to Rogers and all that. 95-96, the first year in the new building, 17,796 fans. But Arthur Griffiths wasn't able to maintain ownership of the team. There were some debts here and there, so he had to sell. And so John McCaw took over. Now, he was based out of Seattle, so immediately the speculation became, so are they going to move the team to Seattle? Even though there was a brand new building right there, and the Grizzlies had just come in, which weren't making any money. So that didn't help. But then the attendance starts to fall. So 98-99, 15,802 is your average attendance. 99-2000, it dropped to 14,641. So it drops from the time that building opens to 4 years later by over 3,000 fans per game. And I think that to this day is the reason why Vancouver doesn't embrace the rebuild. There isn't, and again, at that time it was different, so it's not the same situation. That, of course, was the Keenan Messier debacle and all of the mess that was, and that's why Messier mess, that works. But it is interesting because this is a team that has seen the attendance slip. So 2013-2014, the highest the attendance ever got, 19,771 per game. 2018-2019, mired in the experience of not being a playoff team, 18,022. And when they're not selling, it's not the nosebleeds that aren't selling. You're always going to have the guys in the nosebleeds. It's the fans down front. It's the fans at center ice. It's those tickets that very often you'll see not being used and those seats being empty. So the seats that generate the most money are likely to be the ones that people say, nah, I'm good. Because before the season started, I was like, well, I wouldn't mind having a quarter season package for the Canucks, sure. But then I decided to have a full season package with the Abbotsford Canucks. Because A, it's a lot cheaper, and B, it's a lot closer, and C, I really didn't have a lot of faith with Vancouver when I saw what happened in the offseason. This season, attendance is currently at 18,518. That's paid attendance. And I would expect that number to start to drop. There are definitely signs that this market is losing some interest, and that might be the only way to see a change at the top of the organization. But this is an organization that has always been mired in something. There's been these brief moments where things are good, but it's always followed by just tire fires. Gilbert Perreault, why would he be on the board? Because the first thing that happens to the Canucks is before they ever take the ice, was that they lost the wheel of deciding who gets the number one draft pick. Buffalo did. So they drafted Gilbert Perreault, and drafting second overall, the Canucks took Dale Talon. Now, Talon was a decent defenseman, but the Canucks didn't handle him very well, and he excelled elsewhere rather than Vancouver. Of course, Cam Neely. That's one of the big ones. That's why I'm a Boston fan. The Canucks traded Neely to Boston, and he became a star in Boston. And that's an issue right there, is that this was a team that they would move on from guys, and yeah, Cam Neely happens there. Pavel Bure, the way that he was treated, and then the way that whole era ended, and it was one that started with such promise, and again, I'm seeing echoes of it now. I'm absolutely seeing echoes of the whole Bure debacle when I hear all the criticism about Pettersson. It's the same thing. Bure, he's not playing hard enough. He's not good enough. He's a flash in the pan. Oh, yeah, he can score goals, but he's useless at everything else. Who cares if he scores 2 goals in a game if he's responsible for 3 at the other end? There's nothing really to his game. He's overrated. They should just trade him. And so I heard all of that with Bure. And then Bure ends up going to Florida and gets back into a 60-goal form. And what we found out was Bure had a lot of problems behind the scenes with the Canucks organization. And that was under Pat Quinn's era. You know, Pat Quinn being one that just believes you just keep your mouth shut about everything, go out there and play. But he was known as Stan Pat. Pat Quinn is revered by Canuck fans, but I remember when he was the GM and his name was Stan Pat, because the trade deadline would come and go and he'd do nothing. Burke was basically the same thing. The one thing with Burke was he would explain, if we're not good enough to win the Stanley Cup, I'm not going to get anything at the trade deadline that's going to change that. I'm not going to magically make this team a Stanley Cup champion at the trade deadline. And of course, with Burke, you had the goalie graveyard as well, where there were so many goalies coming and going, and he settled on Dan Cloutier, and he got rid of Artur Serbe because they felt Serbe was too short, not big enough. And they went through all these goalies, and it was crazy. Nonis, of course, comes in, and he got the Luongo deal, and then after that it was, I think I'm going to trade all the second and third round draft picks for whoever. It didn't work. And then you get Gillis. Now, the funny thing is, Canuck fans, it's been long enough now that some of the same people that were chanting fire Gillis before he did get fired are now saying, boy, I miss Gillis. We should get Gillis back. I answer with no. A, I don't think Gillis would come back to this market if he was going to be a GM again. And B, there were a lot of mistakes Gillis made too. Gillis was way too loyal. And this is the weird thing too, because it sort of flies in the face of, this Canucks team currently, all these new players and all these guys going out. But Gillis would sign guys for probably more money than they should have gotten. He'd give them a no-trade clause on top of it. And if a guy's getting a no-trade clause, they're normally giving a team a discount. It wasn't really happening there. So Gillis had it where the Canucks were spending to the cap, and they weren't necessarily good enough. And stop me if you've heard this before. So when I started hearing things like they should bring back Gillis, it's like, oh, come on. Honestly, if they're ever going to get out of this, and it's an if. It's an if, and it's a chuckle, and it's a shrug from me. Because I don't think they're ever going to. Because this for me goes back to the 80s. This for me goes back to when they were wearing this, and they were terrible. The thing is, as bad as that era was, we all understood the Canucks were bad. We understood they were going to be bad the following season, and we understood they were going to be bad the year after that. There was no expectation. Now there is. This is a team that there's expectation to get better. This isn't a team now with Gretzky's Oilers in it, a team with a amazingly talented Flames roster as well. So you can't finish first or second in the division. And that's what the Canucks had then. And so it was them, and then, Winnipeg, LA, and Vancouver deciding, so which one of us is going to be really bad and make the playoffs this year? And sometimes it was the Canucks, sometimes it was the Kings, and sometimes it was the Jets. But it's different now. And for me, because every now and then this comes up, so I'll mention this in this video, where I got broke and I finally said, okay, this team's never winning a Stanley Cup. That's it, was Game 6. Game 6 in Boston. When Vancouver went out there and they laid an egg. And to me that, I mean, you can call it fragile if you want, but they'd gone to Boston for games 3 and 4 and they got spanked. Then they came home and they won Game 5. And I thought, if they're going to be a champion, they go into Boston in Game 6, they assert themselves early in that game, and they bring it home. They win it on the road. They do it in Boston. And Boston smacked them again. So going into Game 7, I had no faith whatsoever that the Canucks would win it as much as I had hoped that they would. And then they had just as miserable of an effort as if I had had a YouTube channel at that time, it would have been pretty ugly. Because, yeah, it was an ugly scene. And I just don't know. I don't know that this team ever actually wins a championship. And I'm aware that, saying in my lifetime sounds crazy, because anytime somebody asks me, do you think X team can win the Stanley Cup in the next 3 to 5 years? My answer is, yeah, in 3 to 5 years, a lot will change. A lot can change. And a team that's downtrodden right now and near the bottom of the standings absolutely could be contending for a cup in the next 3 to 5 years if they make the right moves. But will the Canucks win a Stanley Cup in my lifetime? Oh no, that's never going to happen. And that's just the legit reaction that I have. And it's not going to change. If the Canucks come out, let's say tonight they go into this game against Colorado, and the Avs come into their building and spank them 5-0. If we see a change then, whether it's the coach, whether it's the GM, it will not change my opinion on how I think the Canucks are going to go through this. If they changed both. And again, if Gillis comes back, that'll be a video that I would have a really hard time getting through with a straight face. I honestly, because again, back in 2014, there was almost no Canuck fans that wanted Gillis to stick around. And now there's Canuck fans. There's a large portion of the Canuck fan base like, why don't we get Gillis back? And again, my feeling is, why don't we get somebody completely different who, I don't know, find somebody who's proven they can build a winner. Find somebody who's young. Find somebody who's maybe done it at the AHL level. Somebody who maybe did it at the junior level. We all talk about Kyle Dubas and missteps and right things he's done with Toronto or wrong things. But right now, Toronto's 11-5-1. Yeah, they can't get out of the first round. Yeah, right. They win every year. They do pretty well in the regular season. I'll take that. I'll take that. So while we can quibble and squabble about what Dubas has done that's right or wrong, right now, the results tell you Toronto's doing the right things. They're at least in the position to make the playoffs. Vancouver is not. And they don't seem to be trending in that direction. And while Toronto's got some young guys like Sandin and Robertson as soon as he's good to come back and all that, and you've got some good players there, Vancouver has that as well. It just feels different. It just feels different. And so I really hope that things change. But yeah, I do find that sort of odd. Because again, has Kyle Dubas made mistakes? Absolutely. But the Leafs are still right now a playoff team, and they look pretty good. And they're in the playoffs every year. And even though they lose in the qualifying round against Columbus back in 2020, they had a good regular season to get there, and they're in there every year. They're in a playoff game every year. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Anyways, there you go. I'd be interested to know what other people think. This is kind of just an overview of the whole thing. So that's why this ends up being 36 minutes. Because I don't want to just talk about Benning. Because Benning right now is the target for all things that are hated, and everybody doesn't like what Benning's doing, which is fine and it's fair. But the entire way that this organization's been run all the way back to the 80s, there's been issues the whole way along. And they're a team that got close in 94, and then it fell apart quickly and badly. They fell apart in 2011, and then it fell apart badly and quickly. The difference is, they fell apart in 94, but by the time you get to 7 years after that, they're starting that upswing again. You've got the West Coast Express line, and you've got some pretty good things going on there. This team now is a decade out from the 2011 Stanley Cup Final, and they haven't gotten anywhere near that level again. And it is interesting because while we're seeing Buffalo at 7-6-2, they weren't supposed to be there. The Canucks were supposed to be the one with the 7-6-2 record, and the Sabres were supposed to be 5-9-2. And now, that's not what's happening. So, again, which of those teams spent to the cap? So which one's actually getting their money's worth? And then look at next year and see what Buffalo would be able to do that the Canucks can't. And that's the problem. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. If you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.